The third iteration of the Wealth Tracker spreadsheet is now ready to download, and I think you guys are going to like it. We've listened to your feedback, we've made it a lot more customizable, and we've also given it a cleaner finish. But of course, nothing is ever perfect. So if you do have any suggestions as to how we can optimize it further, then feel free to leave a comment below. If you want a copy of the Wealth Tracker spreadsheet, it is free to download. There are no strings attached. You don't even need to put an email address in to get it. It's available on my website, and I'll leave a link in the description box below. So let's bring it up and we can dive in and I'll show you how it works. So the first sheet I want to run you through is the budget tab. Now this is where you input all of your income and you input all of your expenses, and you do that for each individual month. And you'll notice that under each month, we have both a planned and an actual expenditure. The planned is how much you plan to spend, so that is forward looking. And the actual is how much you actually spend, so that is backwards looking. And the idea is that you set your budget and then you track to see if you've met the budget. The idea behind having a planned and an actual column is that anyone can make a budget, but unless you actually stick to the budget, well then it's going to be a useless exercise. So by having the two columns, it's going to hold you a lot more accountable and you're more likely to achieve your financial goals. Now, obviously there are some numbers pre-filled in here. These are just example numbers that I've made up, so don't pay too closer attention to them. But it's good to illustrate, well, how does the budget tracker work in reality? So in order to input your planned column, what you can do is you can do it, if you like, under columns C and D. So what you do, let's go down to an expense item, let's say home improvements. If we want to budget some home improvements and we want to do it across each individual month, then we can do it up the front here. So let's say home improvements this year is going to be $2,000 per year. So what that's going to do when that's set to annual is it's going to divide it by 12, put it in all of them as a monthly figure. Now, if we change that, the frequency, so we can do $2,000 per month, we can do $2,000 per fortnight, so on and so forth. So this just makes it easy or easier to set up your planned expenditure. Now, of course, you can also override it manually. So for instance, let's say you don't want any home improvements in January, but you do want to spend a good amount of money on home improvements in February. Well, obviously you can do that manually. Now, when it comes to tracking your actual expenditure, this one you always input manually because it's basically looking back to see what you've actually done for that month. And you'll notice that there's these little crosses and these little ticks. And the way it works is that if your actual expenditure was more than what you plan to spend on that item for that month, you get a cross. And it's highlighting that you've spent more than you intended to. If you spend less than what you intended to, you get a tick. The little ticks and the little crosses are just an easy way to visually understand where there is a discrepancy between your plan and actual. You can have a look at a quick glance and work out, well, that's good and that's not so good. Now, a couple of the new additions that we have made to this version of the spreadsheet is you've got this handy little box up here, hide empty lines. And if you tick that, what it's going to do is it's going to contract everything. So it's showing you only the rows that have numbers input into it. So it really condenses things. So it's not always such a huge amount that you have to put in. We've also done something similar for the months. So let's say, January's gone, you don't want to view that anymore. You can press the little minus sign on any of these months and it will hide that month from view. So you don't have to worry about it. But of course, you can bring it back and you can see it again if you tick the plus. Now, all of these items are editable. So you don't have to follow exactly what's there. You can make it up yourself. So for instance, under home, we've got mortgage or rent. Let's say that you don't have rent, it's just a mortgage. So call it mortgage instead of mortgage or rent. You can really customize any of these fields to make it look and feel the way that you want it to look. Now you'll notice under each subheading, so for instance, home expenses, it gets added up here for the subheadings. The total expenditure across all subheadings is added up here, so planned and actual. And then if you scroll down to the bottom, what you'll see is your net cash flow figure. So this is the planned net cash flow that you had for the month of January, and the actual net cash flow that you had for the month of January. And your net cash flow is obviously your income, your total income, minus your total expenses. The reason why I really wanted to highlight that net cash flow position is because this is a big determinant behind how you are doing financially. So if you have too many of those negative months, well, those negative months need to be filled from some source. So either you're going to need to draw down on savings or other investments, or you're going to need to fund it from debt. So that is not sustainable. Too many of those negative months, and that's when you're in trouble financially. But if you start to see those positive months come through, well, you use that surplus in order to be able to build assets. Now, moving on to your net asset position, this is where you input all of your assets and you input all of your liabilities. Up the top here, it summarizes, it adds up all the assets, it adds up all the liabilities. Down the bottom, it gives you a net asset position. So again, assets minus liabilities. And so in assets, you'll notice I haven't included any lifestyle assets. I haven't included things like cars or jewelry or anything like that, simply because I don't really classify those things as an asset. But again, this is very adaptable to how you want it to look. So if you did want to include a car, by all means, chuck a car in there. And you have the flexibility to, again, make it look the way you want it to look. Again, you have this little box up the top, which you can tick to hide any irrelevant rows from the scenario to make it look nice and clean. Liabilities wise, everything again is very customizable. You've got a number of different rows here. All of them are editable. There's some suggested things to put in there, like for instance, buy now, pay later. Yes, I do consider that a debt because you're getting something in advance for paying for it, but you can make it look and feel exactly the way you want it to look. What you want to see is that each month your net asset position is growing. And you can do this via either increasing your assets or reducing your liabilities. Now, if there is a month where your net asset position has shrunk instead of grown, well, then you need to reflect back on why that was. Was it something that was in your control? For instance, did you draw down on assets to spend too much? Or was it something out of your control like a market crash? The budget sheet and the net asset sheet should follow a similar trend month to month. So where you have surplus cash flow in your budget, that should be reflected in your net asset position because you can use that surplus to either buy assets or reduce liabilities. Similarly, if you have a negative cash flow figure, well, that negative cash flow needs to be funded somewhere. So you're going to have to either draw down on your assets or take on more debt to fund the shortfall. This really highlights the importance of controlling your cash flow in order to build wealth. They are directly linked to one another. The cash flow comes first and then the wealth comes second. So your job in order to build wealth is to build surplus cash flow and then use that surplus cash flow wisely. And finally, we have the analysis tab, and this just gives you a little bit of visual representation of the numbers. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because it's fairly self-explanatory. So for instance, the first one here, you have your monthly planned expenditure versus your actual expenditure. You have your assets versus your liabilities. You have your net cash flow, net assets. You have the different expense, the breakdown of the different expense items. You have the income sources. So it gives you that nice visual representation to know where you are heading. But that's it for this tutorial, guys. I hope you like the new spreadsheet. If you do, feel free to download it, feel free to use it, feel free to share it. And of course, if you have any questions, leave it in the comments section below.